Season 2 of House of the Dragon has just come to an end, and a lot of people are disappointed with how the season turned out, particularly with the finale. The House of the Dragon subreddit is up in flames, with people saying this might be the worst Game of Thrones season finale of all time. Most online publications express a similar notion, showcasing great disdain for how uneventful the season has been. But is the season really all that bad? Personally, I disagree, at least with the most common grievance people have with the season. I don't deny, however, that there have been plenty of issues and missteps, which I'll also get into. Moderate spoilers ahead. The main issue most people have with this season is that it's simply too much build-up. It spends 8 whole episodes basically delaying the violence and the war on, eventually ending with no payoff to what has been basically 2 seasons of setup. A lot of people believe that this show about civil war has been delaying actually getting to that civil war. They want battles. While I do agree with the desire for payoff, or consequences for years worth of back and forth between the Greens and the Blacks, I disagree with people's desire for combat. I don't think Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon have ever sought to be action-oriented, large-scale fantasy war simulator shows. I mean, technically they are, with wars being a huge theme, but their significance has always been related to how they affect people on the small scale, and how people and their own ambitions, desires, and flaws create these far-reaching struggles. The point of these shows, in essence, has always been character. It's showing us these very flawed, very real people. It's a fascinating study of how power affects different people, and how these people might react in the face of power or in its pursuit. So when House of the Dragon focuses on characters and their interpersonal drama and prioritizes that over big battles and dragon fights, I think it's headed in the right direction. When it only shows us the end result of the battle between the Brackens and the Blackwoods, but not the battle itself, when it tells us that Aemond burned down Sharp Point and shows us the result, but not the act itself, it is a welcome choice. Awesome battles and set pieces get me going like everyone else, but they're not why I tune into this show. I don't mind not seeing them. I'm not here for the spectacle, but for the story and character interplay. A major theme of House of the Dragon, especially this season, has been about the gruesomeness of a war of dragons and how people practically stand no chance between them. It's built up to be a fearful, dreadful thing that every sane character wants to avoid, something catastrophic and absolutely dangerous. It makes sense for these characters to do their best to avoid it, and for the show not to romanticize or indulge in it. With something like the Battle of Rook's Rest this season, they showed us how insane it was. They shocked us into seeing it from that same fearful perspective that other characters like Rhaenyra did, and made us understand why reasonable people are trying their best to avoid it. However, the dissatisfaction people have had with the season's lack of progress is valid. While I don't mind the lack of battles and how far they've been delayed, I agree that the season did dawdle in a lot of places. Many events could have been hurried along and brushed over, and a lot of the season consisted of one of the two teams deciding to attack and then undeciding, and a constant back and forth that served only to delay real action. In the time span between Season 1 and Season 2, I ended up reading Fire and Blood. Because of that, I know generally where the story is headed. Somehow, it's made me more patient with the flow, and though I recognize that it's slow, I don't mind it or hate it. I'm still enjoying seeing these characters develop, and I feel like in the grand scheme of things, relative to how I know the book goes, the pace is still acceptable. I didn't mind the things people most minded about this season. I was content to go along for the ride, even if it was slow, because the events that happened from episode to episode did enough with the characters for me to be sufficiently gripped and satisfied. However, I do believe that there was a lot of weirdness with the main cast of characters, especially relative to how they were in the last season. Let's start with Daemon. Daemon has been, for the most part, a consistently well-written character. He's chaotic and has his own selfish pursuits and is struggling to accept that the crown passed him over. In this season, Daemon goes to Harrenhal to try to muster up an army for Rhaenyra, but loses himself along the way and reverts back to his original ambitions. I think this is pretty great. It's in line for Daemon as a character. Decades worth of envy and hatred and bad blood with Viserys are hard to erase. In Harrenhal, he decides he wants to be king now. But throughout the season and his stay there, he starts tripping balls and having visions and dreams and whatnot that almost straight up tell him that he shouldn't be doing this. Eventually, he's convinced and reasserts his loyalty to Rhaenyra. And while I appreciate the writers taking their time to show us this character arc, given that it makes sense for this to be a long and arduous process for Daemon to finally be completely convinced to follow Rhaenyra, I do think it went on a little too long. It got repetitive, with him getting visions, then going a bit crazy, then reasserting his decision to be a king of his own. Rinse and repeat. It could have done with a couple less repetitions of this cycle, but fortunately, I was too entertained by the matters of the River Lords and by the charm of Simon Strong and the wackiness of Alice Rivers to get bored of this arc. Could have been shorter, but I wasn't too bothered by it. I was, however, bothered by the fact that Daemon lost a little bit of his edge. They made him a bit less impulsive, less violent, less hateable. Last season, he was choking out his own wife. This season, he's letting a weird Harrenhal witch feed him odd concoctions and talk shit to him with little pushback. It feels a little backtracky on the part of the writers in an effort to make him more sympathetic. And he's not the only one who's gotten this treatment. In fact, he suffered from it the least. The biggest example of a character whose edge and attitude was absolutely demolished is Rhaenyra. I'm gonna come out and say it. Last season, I was practically Team Green to the bone. I almost hated Rhaenyra, and she was morally grey enough to warrant that. And yet, she was strong-willed and fierce and kinda badass. In this season, she's none of those things. She's reluctant and anxious and bumbling and indecisive. She's lost her edge so hard, she's practically been made into a circle. Ryan Condal seems to have decided that we had enough moral ambiguity in the first season and reverted to a more straightforward narrative formula here, with Rhaenyra now taking the role of a typical protagonist. She's now peaceful and barely vengeful, and she's always worried about the small folk, and she's trying so damn hard to stop this war. I don't mind her efforts or her being this kind of character, but it just goes against her personality in the previous season, and feels like the writers felt they had to make her more universally likable and sympathetic. Even I, having been staunchly Team Green before, forgot my hatred of Rhaenyra completely as this new, malformed character took her place. A character I was drawn to and started rooting for. It was too weird. This happened a little bit to Alicent too, but just a little tiny bit. She was still given plenty of moral grayness, from her sleeping with Cole, to her dismissal and ill-treatment of her children, to the agreement she made with Rhaenyra in the finale. Sure, the writers tried to make her a bit more sympathetic, but they kept all her flaws and expanded on them. She feels like a lost character who's uncertain which way to go, and only fully finds herself towards the end of the season, as the haze of blood and war and succession finally clears from in front of her mind, and she learns to kind of abandon tradition and what should be, and instead embraces some sense of individualism. I also didn't mind Alicent and Rhaenyra's meetings, even if the speed at which they happened and the ease in which both managed to get past the other's security stretched my suspension of disbelief. However, I was still fine with the conversation that followed. It felt like two genuine friends who, while not the best communicators, are at least much better at communicating than mostly everyone else in the realm. They're human, and for a second they let go of the grandness of the image that had taken them and forced themselves to realize that they are human and that the other is a human as well, and actually managed to sit down and have a normal conversation. It's funny, it's kind of strange, but it's also sweet. Sometimes you have such a huge quarrel with someone and you feel like you hate them, but then you sit down together and it feels like all that fades away and you're just friends again. Of course, your friends don't usually usurp your throne or kill your kid via their kid and his gigantic dragon, but you get my point. The only issue I had with these meetings between Rhaenyra and Alicent is that they're systemic of a bigger issue, that being the writer's fear to actually be content with having complex, morally grey female characters that can actually be assholes sometimes like the rest of the cast. The content of the meetings between the two is mostly showing them expressing disdain and disappointment at what's to come, and showing them off as voices of reason trying to stop an inevitable coming storm. That, coupled with Rhaenyra's drastic shift to the good side, really reduced from their characters and diminished them, particularly Rhaenyra, to a more traditional protagonist role. Besides that, I think every other character was beautifully done and very fascinating to watch, from Aegon to Cole to Jace and so forth. I had a little bit of an issue with Aemond, who I felt was a bit too comically evil at times, but I guess it's been properly established that he's pretty much psychotic. He's mad with power and it's got into his head. And by the last episode, they managed to humanize him a little, which was nice to see. All in all, Season 2 of House of the Dragon has been pretty good. Pace could be better, but is generally fine in the grand scheme of things. The only misstep is how much they've diminished and whitewashed certain characters. But I hope that that was more of a soft reset and restart that eventually does take them back into more morally gray territories, as opposed to a complete format and foundational change of the characters. What did you think of this season and the show in general? Do you really hate it as much as the internet does? Please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.